Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 5, episode 11. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have misophonia. This is a conversation I've been thinking about a lot since I recorded it a few months ago. I think you just have to hear it. Nick is a normal dude with a wife and family and works as a software developer, but his sound and sensory sensitivities have led to some really intense reactions and situations. There's a lot that's unlike anything you've probably heard about misophonia, but there's also a lot to relate to here. We talk about sound sensitivities, visuals, movement, spatial, different therapies, CBT, medication, trauma, issues his dad had, and a lot more. If you're like me, you'll probably have your jaw dropped in certain places, maybe tearing up in other places, and laughing in yet other spots in the interview. I'm really excited to finally publish this. Let me know what you think by either emailing hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hitting me up on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Links are in the show notes to all those, but you can also just Google it. If you'd like to support the show with a modest contribution, I do have a Patreon page at patreon.com/misophoniapodcast, which is going to help get these episodes in front of more people. Initially by actually helping me get accurate transcripts for every episode published for people who don't want to listen to the audio, and also for Google indexing. My ongoing thanks for all the Patreon supporters so far. And don't forget, you can also leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts. You can actually just hit a quick rating, and that really helps Apple suggest this show to more people. All right, now here is my incredible conversation with Nick. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Adil. Thank you for having me on here.
Great. So, I guess, do you want to tell folks kind of roughly whereabouts in the world you are right now?
Okay, so I'm in London, in the UK, and sort of suburban London.
Yeah. Okay, great. And maybe line of work, kind of roughly what you do for a living.
So, I was an e-commerce developer for about 15 to 20 years. I got very excited in the web, and I knew that was my thing, really. But I haven't been working for the last 2 years because of my various sensory issues, mainly relating to sound and movement, but also relating to spatial issues and how close people are to me, and things like that.
Okay, gotcha. So, have you been able to? That didn't happen? Was that kind of coincidence that it kind of coincided with a little bit with the pandemic, or?
Well, yeah, it was actually. So, one of the things was because I was finding like the world's getting a lot busier, and there's a lot more movement and sound out there. So, for example, with smartphones, there's a lot more twitching and people getting distracted, and I pick up on all of that, and it gets me quite overwhelmed. So gradually over my last couple of years of work, I ended up working from home, and then ended up moving into my own office at work. But I was gradually getting just less and less able to do anything. And in the end, just before the pandemic, I got made redundant because the business model was changing. And so just before the pandemic kicked off, I kind of lost my job. And unfortunately, I haven't really been able to find another one again. And then I kind of came to the realization that I'm probably not fit for work anymore, because I get so overwhelmed by movement and sound and everything like that.
Gotcha.
It's just tough.
Yeah. Has that been so you, as you've been kind of looking for work, have you been specifically kind of letting companies know up front of your requirements, or?
Yes, I have. And what's like in the UK, so I've come to terms with the fact over the last sort of 4 years that I have a disability. So in the UK, when you have a disability, you can ask for adjustments in the workplace. And so I say, oh, I need my own office, or I need to be in a quiet space. But what became tricky was when I had in my head, based on the number of sick days I'd had, that I probably needed about 200 personal days a year. So it's quite a hard proposition to put to a company. Um,
Yeah.
and then I went in my head, look, if you need that many personal days because of your health, maybe you should try getting a part-time job. And it's weird, but actually, so I'm yeah, I lose track of what I say sometimes. So I'm a software developer, as I said, and you'd think there'd be part-time jobs in software development, but they're quite hard to find. Um, they're quite hard to find. I mean, usually they're for startups where people want
Right.
people to be cranking it out. And so I applied. I found this guy who was a little bit out of town, and he had 3 days a week. And I told him my situation, and he said, "Look, I've got one guy. I need to work with one developer. He was a consultant, and I need somebody who's reliable. And you don't sound like you're reliable." And
Mm.
I could only agree with him. And I could only think, if I was trying to employ me, I would find it, I would find the proposition extremely hard. Um, so
Are you? Is this also when you're working from home? I'm curious. Do you have
yes,
issues trying to control your environment? Does that in a way that you're still kind of distracted?
yeah.
Curious. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, yes, is the answer. So it's neighbors. Um, Anything from somebody opening a car door to trimming their hedges. Um, Somebody used a power drill this morning to put together a baby chair of some sort out front.
Mm.
We have construction workers on the street. Even down the road, I can't focus. And then even let's say, so the line we're on is really clear. But if I get involved in a Zoom meeting, any element of sound distortion starts to get me distressed.
Yeah.
So, and anybody who's moving around starts to get me distressed and feeling overwhelmed. Um,
Mm.
and so what happens with that is basically, I I get overwhelmed by all the stimulus, and then it gets to a point where I have a meltdown. So the meltdown either involves me crying heavily and retreating somewhere, or hitting the ground in a fetal position and screaming.
Right. Right.
uh,
And this is even at home alone.
yeah, yeah,
It was
yeah.
into that. Yeah.
So
Uh,
that it happens in the office, it happens at home, it happens pretty much anywhere.
so I don't I mean I don't want to delve too much, but you said it happens in the office too. Have there been situations where you've kind of had a meltdown around a lot of other people?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was really tough, but I think so. I only started having meltdowns about 4 years ago.
Hmm.
My first one was in a supermarket, um, and I had one in the open office in front of all of my colleagues. What happened was we'd moved floors, and all of the acoustics on the floor that we moved to were different, and there are two or three people stood over me having a conversation, and I was sat at my desk,
Oh.
and I felt like I was being buffeted against the wall with the sound and all the movements that they were making. And then what happens is I suddenly everything goes quiet, and then boom, I hit the ground, and I'm
Hmm.
screaming. So
How did they react? Like, how do people react?
well, so because I'd engaged with the corporate health team, it's like a fire drill. Okay,
Yeah.
so basically they all know that it could happen. So everybody evacuated the floor, and then there's a procedure to go through to give me space to help to calm me down. Basically, it's a sensory thing. So the thing that's going to calm me down is cold, darkness, and space. And within about sort of 10 minutes, I'm normally at the point where I'm on my way to being able to sit up. And because in the past I've had sort of various phobias to do with, or sorry, not phobias, anxieties to do with my heart health, I have checked my heart rate at that 10-minute point, and it's been at about 130. So it's quite an intense thing. And it's happened in the office, it's happened on public transport and shops. Even actually quite recently, it happened in the middle of a park, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. And something triggered it, right? Like you heard a sound. Or, yeah. And is it usually sound induced? It seems like there are other senses involved. I'm curious. Part of my ignorance of other kind of conditions, but I'm curious. I'm assuming you must have seen therapists and whatnot about this.
So it's quite tricky to put a name or a label for this. So what was interesting in trying to seek help, I said I get overwhelmed, and it's the sound and the movement mainly, and space. And so what happens in the UK is you get referred to your local mental health services, who then look at you and they give you some basic CBT treatment. So I went through 12 sessions of that, came back to them a year and a half later for another 12 sessions, got referred for an OCD assessment. So they did an assessment there. Then they agreed that it wasn't OCD and it might be autism.
So I was gonna mention these conditions, and yeah.
So I got sent for an autism assessment, and between each of these assessments, it can be between 6 months and a year that you have to wait. And they said, yeah, I'm ticking all the boxes for autism except the social side. So because of that social side being so important to an autism diagnosis, I'm not autistic. And I said, so what can I do? And so they sent me for some misophonia treatment.
Okay.
And I think that was by far the nearest and most effective treatment as a condition for what I've got.
Interesting. And so what was that treatment then for misophonia, and where did you go? Because I know in the UK there's there's quite a bit of activity in the misophonia research space and therapies. Yeah, I'm curious, where'd you go, and what was the treatment?
Yeah, so there's a hospital called the Maudsley Hospital in London, and they have a centre called CADAT, which is the Centre for Anxiety and Trauma. I can't remember what the D is. I can't remember what that means. And so I had 16 sessions, and I was assessed by somebody who had misophonia. And what was quite funny there is she was sniffing the whole time at the beginning. And I couldn't stand it, but I didn't let her know because it's not polite. And I also had one of the things, I think, when they say that misophonia is like you kick in with your fight or flight, and it's very primal with your amygdala and all of that kind of stuff. I feel that the whole care and protect mechanism is in there somewhere too. It's very primal. So I try and harness that, and I try and go, I care about this person. I care about the fact that they're sniffling away and uncomfortable, and I try and hook into that so I don't have a reaction to it.
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't think that has been mentioned here on the podcast yet, but that's an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I like. It's weird, but I use people as my lighthouse. Sometimes I use them as my way. It's like if somebody's making me uncomfortable with their movements, the first thing I can do is talk to them, and then from the point that I'm talking to them, you know, then sometimes people don't want to talk to you. That's fine, but that connection helps to sort of ground me.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly, the misophonia treatment I think is still developing, but the one area that they can focus on is your extreme feelings towards other people and your anger towards them. And so I think the treatments are extremely effective at helping with that. So one of the things was, let's say somebody's slamming doors a lot, or somebody's twiddling their finger. Yeah, slamming
Yeah.
doors is a good example. So you don't go in your head, I think it's okay to slam doors. You go, well, we're all different, and our strengths are all different, and our ability to close things quietly are different, and our own sensitivity to sound is different. So maybe this person just doesn't really realize. And then I think, okay, well, that person also has a dog, so maybe it's harder for them to open the doors. Maybe that's why they're slamming the doors. And with I know on your podcast before, you've had people talking about eating with their family, right?
Oh yeah,
And
all the time.
yeah, okay. I mean, you could
I
call
have to
yeah.
cut people off. That yeah, it's just I could go on forever.
So I think I mean I listened to one of your podcasts recently where you were saying, have you noticed any changes because as your children grow up or as people grow up? Um, and so my son had braces fitted about a year ago, and because of that, he needs to basically clear his mouth more with his tongue.
Mm-hmm.
And my other half has had some dental work, which means she's doing that as well. And so occasionally at the meal table, they'll do what I consider to be pulling a very extreme face at me. The movement is so intense, um, and I just go, "Can you please stop doing that? Don't do that. Why do you have to do that?" And and it's because they've both had these changes. They never used to do it before. Like 2 years ago, it wasn't a thing, and now it
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
I, if I think back to the treatment I had, I have to think about, you know, their situation, what's going on with them, their mouths. My son won't always have this. He's growing up, and just try and ground myself in the fact that I care about them. And one thing, like around the mealtime that we've done recently, is because I'm very sensitive to movement. Is how sometimes you'll eat a meal and there's like, I don't know, say burritos are a good example. You have all the little bits that you put inside the burrito.
Yep.
And so you stick that all on the family table and then tuck in everybody. And there's all this movement with all the hands and all the,
You're right.
yeah, I
Right.
can deal with that. It's overwhelming. It's too much. Um, so what we've done recently is I've asked my other half, she's been really nice about this, if it's okay to prepare the burritos ahead of time. I stay in the other room with my noise cancelling headphones on,
Yeah.
and then I come in and eat the food. It's all prepared and ready, and there's a lot less swinging around.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Wow, Nick. Yeah. So many interesting questions here. Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, I'm glad that the treatment, it sounds like CBT treatment has been helpful, and kind of, it sounds like it's a lot of rationalizing the present, and also maybe rationalizing or trying to think positively about the future, and thinking about how the reasons why somebody might be doing something, and then thinking that it's temporary, and um, the facial expressions or whatever won't be there in the future. So I'm glad that that's been kind of helpful. I, yeah, I want to get to your family, but maybe actually related. You said that when you were going for your autism um, assessment, social wasn't. It seems like you're pretty. You have healthy social relationships, and that's kind of interesting because a lot of us tend to kind of retreat more and more from our friends, and I mean. Well, we're more aware. I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
you have such
No,
intense
it'll give you.
reactions. I'm curious
Mm.
what it's like with your friends, and then we'll get
No,
to your
it'll
family
give
too.
you. That'll give you the wrong impression when they say I'm very socially capable. What it
Yeah. Okay.
means is in interacting with them and in them speaking to my mum, who
Uh,
goes, "Yeah, everything's fine with him. He's never had any problems." And in speaking to me, so I'm in a very controlled environment with them. It's all,
okay.
you know. But in terms of like friends, I don't go out much. I
Yeah,
have
you said
small.
you don't go at that. You right? Okay.
No,
So.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't have friends round the house. I don't go round to friends' houses. Um, Very rarely I go up to a hobby store and play card games.
Hmm.
Um, and I have a few friends from that. But I've sort of, I guess, I'm still, when you see somebody who's a friend and you haven't seen them in 15 years and you're like, you can pick up where you left off.
Yeah.
It's like that, but I haven't really seen them in about 10 years.
So you
Um,
you obviously have a lot of older friends from a while back. It's
yeah, yeah.
your rate of new friends is probably not
I'm
very high.
No, I'm very good at making like friends in shops, friends on the street, friends in the neighborhood, but I'm absolutely terrible at making friends who come round or whose houses I go round to. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or who I have long, meaningful conversations with.
Hmm.
And I don't think I've like I don't know, but like when I was younger, I used to so when I was in my 20s, I'm now in my mid 40s. So when I was in my 20s, I used to basically a busy week was me going to the cinema once in the entire week on my own. It had to be nearly empty or super quiet, nobody fiddling with their mobile phones, and I'd just get into the movie. And that was it. And then if I went to a friend invited me along to a party, I generally say I'm sorry. I'd always pretty much go, yeah, sure, I'll come. And then 60% of the time, I'd ring off sick and not go to the
Hmm.
pub. I much favour barbecues around lunchtime, so they're outdoors. There's lots of space, and I can deal with things better there. And I tend to be very, very one to one. Like I tend to try and find a quiet corner, find somebody to talk to for quite a while, and really I'm really into my food. So I know I was trying to rationalize why maybe I haven't had as much have as much problems growing up. I think two reasons. One, I absolutely love my food. So the moment that hits the table, that's all I'm thinking about. And then
Hmm.
when I was much younger, my dad he was extremely strict. So we would be much, much more worried about anything we would do that would be remotely out of line at the meal table than any sound or movements. It would be far in excess of that. Um, so I don't know. Um, but it's
Okay. So acquaintances, you're careful about um, where you um, interact with other people. It's pretty
yeah,
controlled. Were the movies that you went to, was that kind of like an escape for you, that you'd really
yeah,
look forward to, that you can kind of be away from everybody and just kind of lose yourself in this other world?
absolutely, yeah, yeah. It was, and
Was it an escape from home, basically? Like, maybe I don't know what the environment was like at home. We can maybe get into that a little bit. I'm curious. Like,
So
is it just like, oh, you heard it? Was it just like, oh, good movies out, and I'm going to go check it out? Or was it more like, I need to kind of take a break?
was this like, so in my 20s, that was in my 20s, so I wasn't living with my parents anymore. So
Okay.
I'd go to the cinema a lot in my 20s. And then I guess in my teens, if I was taking a break, I'd go and find a quiet place to go and sit in the garden. I grew up in Hong Kong, so there was a lot of outdoor space where I was. It was relatively quiet, and what I would do every day when I came back from school is there'd be a very signature sound that you would want to listen out for. I lived on the 12th floor. I opened the window, and then you hear this little knock, and it's the sound of somebody kicking a football around on the field downstairs, and then I was down playing football. So I'd say every day I was playing football for about an hour and a half.
Okay.
With the local kids from the area.
Did any part of that bother you? All the because kids, especially teenage kids and younger, can be kind of rough acoustically. I'm curious how
No,
your misophonia
nothing,
was back then. Yeah. Okay.
nothing from a sound movement point of view there. I did have a problem with, you know, people coming in for hard tackles and people hanging about right next to me too much. But the football, it was a strange football game because you'd have 18-year-olds and 6-year-olds all playing football together. And no, none of that. And from a sound,
no, go on. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, from a sound point of view, when I was growing up, my dad playing radio in the early morning, the vibrations from that were quite difficult to deal with. There was another signature sound that was I'm on high alert. It was my dad went through phases where he'd be quite a heavy drinker, and there was a little thing with his lip where his lip wobbled a little bit and made a little noise, like a little saliva noise, and that was the sound that you had to be extra careful in how he would react to things because he was essentially drunk. And I'm very sensitive to that particular sound still now.
Yeah.
But sound overall Hong Kong is a very busy city, but there are some really quiet areas, and it was extremely quiet. It's not the same as London, and smartphones for me have created an insane amount of noise. And like when I say noise, I also mean movement. It's just it's unbelievable. I think when I was in my teens, if somebody disconnects from the world, it's because they're daydreaming, right? Occasionally once every 3 weeks, you see somebody disconnecting because they're daydreaming, wandering about. But now I see like every day, half a dozen people who are staggering around because they're connected to their phone, and I get a real sense that somebody isn't there anymore, in terms of their ability to communicate. This is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, yes, I see you, yeah, I'll get out your way, you get out my way. It seems a lot more dysfunctional now. Bit strange.
Yeah, that's interesting what you said about back in the day when they want these things, people would daydream a little bit more, maybe more organically, and now there's not the old kind of daydreaming anymore. It's
No.
You're ultra connected, but you're also distracted in a different way.
Yeah,
or
but
you're
it's
kind
like
of out of your
but it's like the distraction. When somebody was distracted in my teens, it was because they were daydreaming or because a friend was yelling to them across the street. It was a very rare thing for somebody to be distracted. and now it's not a rare thing for somebody to be distracted. There's if you count, let's say you got 20 people on a high street, how many people have got their phones up in front of their faces?
Right.
You're probably talking about 5 or 6 on average.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't find that difficult. I find that very difficult to deal with.
So seeing people on their phones.
It's not just that. It's that how to explain? You know, when somebody's got the remote control and they do that little adjustment with their hand, to when they're about to press a button.
Right.
That triggers me.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you imagine everybody with their phones doing their little adjustments when they tap on it.
The little thumb movement and finger movement.
The little thumb movement.
Yeah.
Every single one of those I pick up on.
Yeah. So scrolling is not good for you.
No, scrolling is tapping, scrolling, right. Adjusting, and it's also, I know this is going to sound a bit bizarre, but when somebody is walking along and they're not focused on their phone, I can tell they're present. But the moment they're ensconced in their phone, there's something. Some people are quite good, like they stay quite steady, but some people bend their leg just that little bit, that shows that they're not really there anymore. They're somewhere else. They're on the internet browsing, and I just pick up on all of that, and it's just like I can't deal with it. It's too much.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're just a little bit of body language that you're picking up on when somebody disengages with where they actually are at the moment.
Yeah, and I also, when I rationalize it, I go, because I've come close to quite a lot of trauma, and I've had some traumas in the past to do with people, and sometimes not people. But like I need to feel a degree of reassurance from the other people who are in my community. I need to feel a connection to them, or I feel very, very unsafe. And I don't know definitively if that's true, but that's one of the ways I can rationalize it, apart from the fact that all of those movements are misophonia triggering movements. They're, the hands, the feet that are about human communication are essentially the things that seem to trigger me the most. And what I'm also finding quite difficult with smartphones and mobile phones is the degree of variance on the sound and the degrees to which they leak, and the tinniness of played music. I find that distressing. And I think it sort of starts, and then suddenly I'm not there anymore, and everything's feeling fuzzy and weird, and it's like a sort of a disassociation state that comes about from all this stimulus, and also the specific sounds that are made by all of these things. Yeah, and it's just overwhelming, basically.
Yeah. I'm curious though. A lot of these have to do with. And we'll get into some of the your past again in a little bit. I'm curious if there are no, if you're in a place where there are no smartphones around. I guess that doesn't really exist anymore. I'm curious. Do you think, like, in a busy downtown, maybe like 20 years ago, was it the smartphone as kind of like a major accelerant? I'm curious if there were no smartphones around, if you would still be overwhelmed by this kind of the modern movement. And
I think
because there are sounds, from like playing in stores and shops, and just kind of leaking out of cars and whatnot. I'm curious if those, like a car driving by with thumping music or whatnot out a window also bothers you.
So the car driving by with thumping music is, in all of those things, is the only thing that approximates to that. So car noises, the engine noises, right? I've got used to those. I certainly haven't had much of a problem with those, and I think the one that's the trouble. There's a guy locally who has a sports car, and when he parks it up, he leaves the engine on, and it causes the house to vibrate, and I get really stressed out by that. But funnily enough, the car noise that distresses me the most are the car alarms, and
Oh
also
yeah.
what I've been noticing is some of the electrical cars have they kind of have substitute noises for engine noises to try and
Yeah.
yeah, and those get me really distressed. Um, uh, I don't know what it is about the frequency, like the iPhone notification sound. So
Yeah.
that is the worst mobile phone noise for me. So how I feel that is I feel a ping. So I feel that hit me, and then I feel the reverberation from it basically cut through me. Yeah. And then it
Hmm.
lingers, and it's like I know a lot of like some people describe their misophonic reaction as like being a violation or like being like they have a really strong emotional response, but I feel completely violated by it. I feel specifically the sound has been created as an attempt to get attention, and it's doing that job very well. And for somehow many people are able to filter this stuff out, but I can't. Um,
Right.
and it's pain. It's really painful. So I would be in work about 3-4 years ago with my boss, and I'd be getting. It was a one-to-one meeting in a very spaced out room. Everything was great, but he had his iPhone on the table, and I was panicking. So like, when's that going to ping? Is that off? Have you turned that off? I can't deal with it. Um, and
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I have kind of similar things sometimes with those, even if it's on vibrate, because yeah, I mean, that's not quiet.
no, it's not quiet. And I mean, it's I'll give you an example of, I was trying to have a meeting once. It was in a corridor. It was scheduled to be in a corridor. I mean, that makes no sense to me. And then there was a guy with a smartwatch, and there was a guy with a phone, and the phone guy would get notifications. The guy with his smartwatch would twitch his arm, look at his phone, go,
Mm,
it's nothing. Then he'd get a notification, go, it's nothing. I'm trying to have a conversation with you guys. I can't do anything. I'm feeling really distressed by the sounds and the movements that you're making, and this is just completely dysfunctional. You know, it's
yeah,
and I think it's part of the modern world. Somebody rocks up to your table with a laptop. That's I can't deal with that. That's normal in an office. Yeah, it's like
right.
somebody starts typing on the laptop. Every key press gets me distressed. I can't deal with that.
What were you
Um,
doing in an office then? Or did you have headphones on?
so this it's been over the last um, it's been over the last sort of 4 or 5 years that this has got worse.
Yeah.
And I can equate it to smartphones getting more prolific,
Hmm.
but I also equate it to something changed when I had my first meltdown. Um, I never I it's really bizarre when you're used to like how you behave and how you respond to distress. Like crying, yeah, I can do crying. I've got no problem with crying. I'll cry every single
Yeah.
day, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can handle crying. But hitting the ground screaming, um, it's like what happened there? And I've got no, and I think again, if I rationalize it, it's the ultimate protection mechanism. You scream, you get people to get away from you. You're also blocking out their noise because you're making the biggest noise you possibly can. In a fetal position, you're blocking out the light. It's a very well known protective position. Um, so I think since my first meltdown, which was in a supermarket, that it's just I've just been unable to properly do work and unable to properly function.
What happened in the supermarket, if you don't mind?
Yeah,
I'm curious.
sure.
Was it a surprise? Or did you sense something was coming up? I mean, I'm not obviously the sound or whatever it was must have been a surprise. So I'm curious if you sensed things were going to leave kind of your normal reaction.
No, no, I didn't. I knew I was getting very distressed about it. I was a bit. So I was on an SSRI at the time, um, for to help with the anxiety, and I think that was part of the contributor to the unusual reaction. But what I was doing was we'd ordered a new computer for my other half, and we had to pick it up from inside a supermarket. And we went to the desk where we were getting the computer, and they said, "Well, we haven't heard of this computer. We don't know anything about this." So I was doing that whole conversation where you engage on that, which is a little bit stressful.
Yeah.
And then the supermarket has had this loyalty scheme, which involved every customer gets a free cup of coffee every day. So yeah. So where do you go? Where do you go for your free cup of coffee? Well, you queue up with holding your cup in your hand at the very same till that I was at, trying to get my computer problems resolved. So I had three people with empty coffee cups who wanted their coffee, and then that classic supermarket situation with a guy pushing 12 trolleys that are all connected together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So those all rattling around behind me, and I just felt like I was not there anymore. And then a guy comes really close behind me, and I said to him, "Look, you're really close behind me. Can can you please give me some space? I can't handle you being so close to me." He ignored me. So I managed to navigate that whole situation. I was feeling so out of it, and then the guy who ignored me, and I'd said, can't you speak English? He went he went the other side of the till, and he was giving me a nasty look. So I thought, hold on a second, there may have been some miscommunication here. So I went over to talk to him. The manager arrived, and it was that moment where the manager arrived, his two sons arrived. I had four people around me. The manager was going, "How can I help?" And I was like, "I know this guy. I like this guy. He's been helpful." And then that sudden change in tempo from being stressed to feeling some minor sense of relief. Everything went silent. I hit the ground and I was screaming. I didn't stop for about 20 minutes. Like I got up after about 10 minutes, and my other half and my son were in the car, and my other half came to get me because they rang her in the shop car park from inside. And then so basically, Adil, I'm just gonna have to stop there because it's becoming too real on that.
Yeah. Please, that's fine. This is yeah. I mean, that's yeah.
I can remember everything in very vivid detail, and it feel too real, and I know when I'm going in the wrong direction.
Right. Don't. Yeah. We'll put a bow on that. I think. I think. First of all, I think. Thank you for sharing that much, and I think that's helpful for a lot of people who. I'm sure some people listening have kind of been around that situation, but yeah. Maybe that's. I'm glad at least you got past that.
I want to share something else about that, which is very interesting. So when I was waiting for my treatment, to get a referral for misophonia, and I was actually waiting to be assessed for autism. I went, "Look, I don't know what's going on with me. I'd never heard of misophonia. I think it's probably autism. I need somebody to help me." So I found privately somebody who specialized in people with autism, and I started seeing her every couple of weeks for a session. and that was super helpful, really, really helpful. And then one day, what happened? So she's based in a physiotherapist office, and we went up to the we'd have the same room every time, yeah, because depending on which room you're in, you hear noises, and I couldn't handle some of those noises. So, and I got there, and I was in the waiting room one day, and I said, "Have we got the usual room booked?" And they said, "No, no, no, you don't. Sorry, you'll have the other room." And I said, "I can't deal with that." And one of the receptionists didn't like my tone, so she came over. She was standing over me very close, and she was saying, "You can't speak to my receptionist like that." And the other receptionist stood up, yeah, and I hit the ground screaming, and I had a meltdown, right? So at that very same moment, the CBT practitioner who I was working with, she arrived. So the three of them were there with me having a meltdown in the waiting area of the thing. So anyway, so I like to try and, when they say lemons and lemonade, make the best of something. There was no way I could have a session in there afterwards. So I was outside the place in about 10 minutes speaking to speaking to Gemma, who's my CBT practitioner. She's helped me for so many years. And I said to her, "Look, that supermarket I had my first meltdown in is a 5-minute walk. Let's go there. The day can't get any worse." So, and this is the thing that you don't get much with CBT is you don't get a lot of it happens in a quiet, isolated space where you don't get a chance to be in the space where you get the anxiety. But we went to the supermarket where I'd had my first meltdown. We walked around. I talked to her about how I was reacting to the sounds, the movements. We looked at different types of grounding. Like I found one of the things, I'm a big dairy man. I like milk. I like dairy. The dairy section is nice and cool. So I found if I head to the dairy section, it helps to ground me. Sometimes in a supermarket, there's a trolley that's near the dairy section, and metal absorbs the cold very well. So if I put my hand on the metal, it helps to calm me, helps to ground me. And that whole process of just even speaking to her when I was in the environment where I was experiencing all of this distress meant that I could come to terms with being back in that shop, which I hadn't been in. I think for a year and a half, I'd avoided going in there because of that meltdown. I'd never been able to go back in there. And I'd say my ability to go back into shops after a meltdown was probably, I'd say 2 weeks. It would take me out for 2 weeks. Now it's about 2 days. Unless it's really severe, it's about 2 days. And I'm like, I've fallen off the horse, I get back on the horse. And
how often are they still happening? Do you know?
So a really bad public one is maybe once or twice a month. But some form of meltdown in the home or in public is probably once a week, and some form of sort of crying or distress from this daily.
From this specifically, yeah.
From not like it's basically the sound, the movement, and the space. Those three things, they're all related. Because I went down to my in-laws' house. They had an absolutely huge garden. I sat in there and I could hear some cricket balls being hit like a mile away. And it didn't bother me. I mean, it did a bit, but because I knew they were a mile away, I was...
So it's typically a combination of those three factors.
Well, yeah. But a specific sound at a distance could be enough. Like I'll give you another example, which is just tells you how shows you how bizarre the world can be sometimes. So I used to get one of my treatments at a mental health hospital, and they had a great big garden that you could go in and wait. I couldn't wait in the waiting room, so I went and waited in the garden. So they then redeveloped the mental health hospital into a park so that the people in the local community could enjoy the park. And they created a small mental health unit near a busy tube station in a busy part of town. So I'd show up to the waiting area. There'd be nobody there, and I could handle it. One person shows up, I connect with them, I say hello, and it's okay. Then it was raining outside, and about 4 people show up for a group session. Now they sit down, and one of my really bad sound triggers is somebody sitting down and they run their hands down their coats. That's sort of it's like a shuffling noise that they're making with their hands on their coats. And I was in absolute tears. I had to wait outside on the street, and the therapist had to come out and collect me because I couldn't handle that sound. Dog chains, metal, even seeing metal. So large amounts of metal, large amounts of shiny metal gets me distressed. My other half had some new jewelry 2 days ago, which is made up of beads. Yeah. So she's like, oh, this is lovely. And then she puts it on, and I can hear all those beads crinkling and crackling. Right. And I'm immediately like, oh my gosh, no, I can't deal with that. That can't be anywhere in the house. I can't even see it. I can't deal with this. And it is that bad. I try and I try and let whatever I can handle go. Yeah, because, and I try and but this was nuclear. I couldn't. There's no way I could deal with it. It was absolutely horrific. But I just had another thing, going back to the treatment I had that I think you might find interesting. So, you know how some of the latest studies are focused on it being the motor parts of the brain that are overactive? Yeah, the motor cortex. So for me, it's always about movement and the noise creating a sense of movement, which then distresses me. And it's quite hard to break that down. But when I spend a long time thinking about a particular situation, it's always down to a movement. So I'll give you an example. So we focus this on treatment. So if my other half is unpacking shopping bags in the kitchen, I have to have my noise cancelling headphones on, the fan on, and I have to be doing something that distracts me, or I start to get distressed. Now it's the crackling sound of the plastic bags. Now, the reason that crackling, I've rationalized it feels distressing, is because I can visualize and I can feel all of the movement that's associated with that sound. And that movement I feel internally. Okay. It's not like somebody's physically doing that to me, because I can't feel it on my skin, but the sense internally in my brain is as if somebody was doing that inside of me. So when let's say somebody's doing a small movement and they're nibbling on their fingers, I feel crunched up in a ball. That sense of their fingers being crunched up results in me feeling crunched up. And it's a very strong, quick reaction. But that's why. Did you hear that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't heard anyone kind of like think about it down to that level where it's trying to associate it with movement or making that association.
Because that's where in our later sessions I was trying to steer us in that direction. And the therapist I was with was really cool. We did various experiments. So one of the interesting experiments is, let's say you find somebody's arm movement difficult. Yeah, they're doing so let's say they're jabbing with their finger, or they're twirly whirling with their hair.
Right.
Okay. What you do is you stand and you twirly whirly your hair, or you move your finger in exactly the same way at the same
Yeah.
time. And for me, that takes away a lot of the distress.
Interesting. I mean, that's kind of the mimicking reaction that a lot of us have for the pure sounds is eating while somebody else is eating somehow makes things feel better.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think, is that because you're making a sound and therefore you're sort of feeling that
Masking it.
you're making a sound, and that's okay because we're both making a sound, or we're masking it, or
Mm-hmm.
is it because when you're making that sound, the sense of movement in the motor area feels like your own movement and not somebody else's. So
So that is what, yeah, that's kind of one of the possible conclusions from Dr. Kumar's study is that they were offering the suggestion that that imbalance of you not actually moving but your brain firing, like the early parts of the thought process there is what's causing the discomfort.
mm,
And so by kind of completing the by making the movement, you're kind of completing completing the chain or whatever, and then bringing order back to your your thought process, your brain.
yeah, I mean that. Yeah, it's quite hard because so I'm a software developer, as I've said a couple of times.
Yeah.
I know who you are, and in software development, if something's going on in the code, you've got diagnostic tools that let you
Hmm.
yourself attach to them and figure out what's going on. And it feels like misophonia is being looked at, and the human brain, you just can't plug into it
Right.
the same way as you can plug into a program and kind of debug it yourself, kind of thing, like
Right.
figure out what's going on yourself. It's a tricky, slow process, but I'm really hopeful about the new findings by Dr. Kumar. I'm really hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it sounds like it's going in a positive direction. Do you want to switch back to switch gears to kind of your kind of early years
Yeah, yeah,
a little bit. I know we're already kind of like almost an hour in, but
yeah.
I kind of want to chat a bit more to kind of like
Sure, sure,
because
sure.
you got just a lot of interesting things here. But I don't know which parts are less comfortable, more comfortable, but
Anything you're interested in is fine.
yeah. Well, let's start. Maybe a lot of us our first triggers are our parents, and you did mention some issues, potential issues with your dad.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your dad a little bit and kind of when, maybe especially around the time that things started for you? And you said he was very strict. I mean, this is not uncommon to hear that there was a kind of a very tense home environment. That's kind of what I'm imagining? Is that true? Was it kind
Yeah,
of
it was
a
really
tough environment? Yeah.
it was tense. My dad would also be quite strong with too much noise in the house. He wouldn't like that at all. And my brother used to walk around on tiptoes, and in his teens, I thought he was doing that because he had growing pains with his legs. So I thought that's what made his feet more comfortable. But he told me a while ago it's because my dad was so strict on us making too much noise in the house. um,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very bothered. He used to get fairly intense reactions to things in public, like waiters sweeping a napkin anywhere near him. So it's possible that he had um, misophonia. He certainly he seemed to unexplainedly look really, really angry in relation to, I'm not quite sure what happened or what I said, and I do think he found it difficult to deal with overstimulation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he possibly dealt with it by drinking, um, and I couldn't go down that road. I don't think that's the right road to go down.
No, I yeah. From everything I've heard, yeah, I would stay away from that.
Yeah, and I mean, so I personally, it's funny because the time when my misophonia got worse was after my dad died, which was about 5 years ago, and I think he's been the. It's weird. He's kind of his presence always sort of. I was more afraid of being out of line, you know.
mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just it might just be a coincidence. I truly. I mean, when a parent dies, it's a big thing. It's not. I wasn't expecting it to be that big, but it was. And I think the first time I really had a kind of a screaming episode, but it was standing up. Was was to do with an aftershock of my dad having died. Um, you know, and that's quite a tough thing for anybody to deal with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the thing is it's very depend. I think misophonia for me can be dependent on your environment, and I lived in such a quiet area. It was so quiet, and the house was so quiet. And if it wasn't quiet, it was because there was an argument, or it was my dad. And for any
Right.
other reason, it would be quiet. So it's like, um, and at school. So one of the things I can't remember. It was one of your recent podcasts, and I think it was about some poor chap who had to sit his final exams, and they wouldn't let him have his earbuds, and they gave chewing gum to other students or something. I can't.
Yeah, I forget
And
who that was, but that sounds
I
familiar and
just,
horrible.
yeah, I just don't under. You see, I think like eating in a classroom is completely not on in my books. Like if you're doing it at lunchtime, that's fine, but during an actual class, it's completely alien to me. I'm not. I don't know if I've misunderstood if that happens in the American school system or in other school systems, but it's just completely unheard of. And I was once gently flicking a rubber band at the back of a class, and the teacher picked up on it, and it was like not happening. Silence.
Mm.
That's what I'm used to. So being in, when I'm in a classroom, the teachers are focused on the work, and when I'm out at break time, when I was out at break time, I could always escape. And that would either be so my escapes were either exercise or food, and I love my food, and exercise is fantastic. If you're playing, like I don't know if people who have misophonia find if they're playing basketball, if they find any element of that difficult to deal with. If somebody's a bit sweaty, and
Mm.
then they say something and it's a little bit like they're smacking their lips a bit, maybe. But I found sports very safe as an activity for me.
Even now.
But I I'm very unfit now. I don't do any sports, and now I couldn't deal with it.
Mm.
And
Okay.
I'm a big believer that depending on the person, you're able to deal with stimulation to a certain level and noise and movement to a certain level. It gets harder as you go older, but it's a sort of it's like a bucket that fills up. And I think because of the nature of society these days, the bucket fills up so rapidly that and I've had so many meltdowns, which I think have caused me to fear people and to fear going outside. And I can't really equate where I am now and where society is now to where I was, um, out in Hong Kong 37 years ago, before the internet, before mobile phones and social media. It's a completely different world.
Right. Right. A
Yeah.
lot of it looks similar, but it is. It's, yeah, it's quite different.
Yeah, it's
same buildings, same trees, but there's a
same
lot
same
that's
buildings,
changed.
same trees. You're right. You're right there. But I mean, the thing is it's all about the movement and the noise, and particular. It's I don't know if you I don't know how much time we have, but I mean, there's just one other thing which kind of
Yeah, please.
yeah. So one of the things which makes my situation a bit different is the trauma. So about 15 years ago, my ability to deal with the world kind of started. I my resilience got utterly destroyed. So what happened was I had a double blackout um, at night. I was going to the bathroom and I blacked out a couple of times, and the doctor looked into me for a uh, heart condition, and he said it might be a sudden death heart condition. So the scenario you're told about for this particular condition, which is extremely rare, which they took about 6 months to investigate. Okay, they do it a lot quicker these days. Basically, an alarm clock goes off to wake you up, and you go into cardiac arrest as a result of that sound. Yeah. So you within 2 minutes of hearing an alarm clock, you're dead. And so I lived in that state for 6 months, and to the point where I was then went into hospital, and I couldn't sleep because I was so worried. So they gave me for the first time temazepam and to help me sleep. But what happened was, because the alarm systems in the hospital were configured in the cardiac ward to alert people to wake up when their heart rate was kind of under 40, my heart rate would sink under 40 every time I was about to go to sleep, which is quite low. The alarm would kick in, jerk me awake. The drugs would be trying to sedate me whilst I was repeatedly being um, sort of coming awake. And um, it was absolutely horrific. I think it was about sort of 8 months until I suddenly came to terms with. I suddenly was all the investigations had finished, and I was like, okay, you're not going to suddenly die from a sound. And the amount of adrenaline that went through my system in those 8 months was just insane. I think that kind of supercharged a pre-existing sensitivity that I'd had as a kid to being overstimulated, and it just left me in a state where I just don't respond to the world um, in a safe way anymore. And it's it's quite tough to deal with, to be honest.
Yeah, so were a lot of these let me just to clarify a little bit, the alarm clock
Yeah.
association, was that what it started the double blackout at home? I'm just trying to think
No,
what
no.
where it
So
was.
so so what happened is I woke up in the middle of the night, and
Yeah.
um, I won't sleep on a sprung mattress anymore because of this. So what happened? I was sleeping on my front. So one of the length of my arms had pins and needles.
Yeah.
The other arm, I had no feeling in my arm at all. And I thought, okay, this is a really bad case of pins and needles. So I went to the bathroom to shake it out.
Yeah.
And as I was shaking it out, I suddenly passed out. And
Okay.
in passing out, I scraped my back on the bathroom door. And as I came to, because I did fully black out, I then came to, and I then passed out a second time. And so, following on from that, I was sent to a doctor who then referred me to the hospital. And the hospital said, well, we're looking at your heart rate here. It might be that you have this condition, and
Mm,
we want to investigate it. So they gave me some information on the condition, um, and they said, "Oh, this is a very rare condition, and but it's very serious. And what can happen is, for example, somebody can wake up to the sound of an alarm clock, and that can cause them to go into cardiac arrest, and then they die suddenly as a result of this.
Okay, that
So,
is almost the last thing that somebody with misophonia would want to hear. Am I
oh
crazy here?
yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Wow.
So my state of, I don't know,
Yeah, yeah,
hypersensitivity to the world. It's very
absolutely.
hard to find the right word, but
Yeah,
hypersensitivity um, is probably rooted in that time. And
yeah,
so after my misophonia treatment, I said, look, I'm still getting all of this stuff going on. Maybe it's some sort of PTSD kind of reaction to this whole situation. And to all of the meltdowns I've had in shops and difficult interactions with other people that have kind of caused them. And so I put it to the health system over here. Look, can I get assessed for PTSD? Because I think it's a missing part of the puzzle. So that then went off to the same place I got my misophonia treatment for, and they said, well, actually, we're not gonna look at you for PTSD, but what we're gonna do is refer you to the absolute centre for misophonia in the UK, which is in Oxford, um, and they can look at that trauma along with your misophonia. And so that was about 2 months ago. And so what happens is you have to wait for funding from your local health authority, who will
hmm
then pay for you to get the specialist treatment. So I'm 2 months into waiting for that, and hopefully that will look at the trauma side of things as well. So I'm hopeful. And it's a bit like every CBT practitioner I've gone along to and have said, this is what I think I have. They've gone, we agree. And it doesn't have to have a label. Okay, so this is the thing that people like. I think I'm just gonna say two things that I think might be helpful
yeah,
for people. Is number one, you don't have to have a label. You don't have to fit properly. If it's causing you real distress in your life, it's worth going and getting some help. And CBT is a really effective way at doing it because it focuses on solving problems. Yeah, and that's really good. And then the other, you sometimes do plugs for things.
yeah,
So I want to plug a book. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Go for it.
this book is called In Pursuit of Silence: Listening for Meaning in a World of Noise, by a guy called George Prochnik. Yeah.
hmm
And why this book is really good is because it focuses on noise as a subject, and he looks at noise in society, who's making noise, what noise is all about. If you go into a room where all noise is gone, you can hear two things, which is your nervous system and your blood flow. Okay, so you can't ever escape noise. But noise is a good thing. It's like if you've got misophonia, you might be thinking, oh, like I hate noise. But I personally, I love noise. I just hate so many different types of noise. But some noise, like the sound of the wind, like there was a neighbor who did something that just drove me insane because they got wind chimes. I can't stand wind chimes because
mm
what you're taking is one of the things that of which I love the sound the most, and you're replacing it with something that causes me distress whenever the wind is blowing. But like lots of sounds. Like I was once sat by a river, and there was a swan, and the swan took off. And my gosh, the noise from those wings were incredible. Like that, you could feel like the air. And I love my connection with the noise of the world. It's just a whole lot of it I can't handle. So
Yeah.
this book is really really good because he goes from everything to going and talking to monks to basically driving around in a car with some guy who does shows where it's about making your car engine as loud as you can make it. So it's a really good book for, I don't know, feeling that noise isn't the enemy.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm gonna have to get that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check out that book for sure. That sounds really interesting. Because you're right. We focus on the sounds we hate, but I've had Dr. Afranian, who was part of Kumar's group on, and she talks about how she's looking for sounds that have the opposite effect, and have a positive effect on people. Because she thinks it's not just all about negative sensitivities. There are positive sensitivities that maybe we should look for, and as part of treatment, maybe try to replace the negative ones.
One of the things I found interesting is, the whole ASMR thing. So sometimes I've seen out there, on Twitter, somebody, what's misophonia? Oh, it's the opposite of ASMR. Okay. And then I go along to a lot of these ASMR things on the internet and go, and they make my skin crawl. They're like the chalkboard scraping with nails. They're horrific. And about 1 in 10 of them is actually quite nice, but the majority of them are triggering. They are. So it's very interesting that a range of noises that are supposed to create pleasure can cause such distress, which I find. Yeah.
What are some other sounds? What are some sounds that do, like you said, the wind, the sound of a bird's wings as it takes off? Are there any other sounds that
I like?
Yeah.
I love. Okay, so I like. I've got a fan on behind me, and it's got a sort of white noise. That's nice. I like the sound of the sea. Most sounds. I like the sound of rain against windows. Not if it's irregularly dripping and you hear it in a really irregular way, but I love the sound of rain. I'm just trying to think of some more unusual sounds. So these are not sounds that I love, right? Because I was about to say a toilet flushing, but so you know how you have this idea of an earworm, yeah? So I'm trying to. Okay, so you know how you listen to music and it goes round in your head?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have some neighbours downstairs who play their music in a way that distresses me, and it's really tinny, and the particular nature of the sound I find difficult. So one of the things I found that I can do if I'm finding it difficult to get out of the house is I flush the toilet. And what happens is the sound of the flushing toilet stays in my head longer than it's actually making it. So if I flush the toilet, it gives me a window of about a minute and a half to get out of the house with that still going around in my head. And like that, the sound of the toilet flushing is not a sound that distresses me. It's a sound I've been hearing since for 40 odd years, right?
Right.
Toilets have been flushing in similar ways
since you left diapers, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I have no distress from the sound of a toilet flushing ever. It's like water, right? And so I use that to get me out of the house sometimes, or So, and I think when I remember back to when I was younger, my hearing was sharp. Like I can hear everything across the house. I can hear everything across the house now. Any little thing that's going on around, I can hear it. But I used to say in our family, like my brother and my dad had a very specific sense of sound, which was the chocolate biscuit packet sense. So you could tell from across the house who was opening the packet of chocolate biscuits in the fridge, how many of those biscuits they had taken, and how many were left.
Wow.
Because we all wanted those biscuits,
Yeah.
And I think it's like people think about sound isn't just a simple thing. It's complex. So at a distance, you might be able to tell the weight of an object from sound. Yeah, you might be able to do all sort of things. How does your brain allow you to assess the weight of an object from a distance based on a sound? Yeah, that sounds pretty complicated to me.
Well,
So
I think it's kind of how we evolved. I mean, before we had smartphones or any of this stuff, like we only had our five senses to interpret the world. So they have to evolve in a way to give us, like, I think, these instincts. And maybe now those instincts are being kind of warped.
well,
Or
if somebody's slurping at a meal table, or they're chewing gum, it's not just a sound. That would be a very simplistic way of looking at
right,
it.
right,
It's a whole mechanism that the brain is using to assess that. What is that a wet sound? Is that a dry sound? You know,
yeah,
I saw it was a lovely the Misophonia Quiet Please, that documentary,
hmm,
which is just lovely because you see actual people talking about their misophonia. And my problem with mouth sounds isn't that bad for a lot of people with misophonia. And then somebody introduced their husband, who was standing there, and he said a few words, and I was, oh my gosh, I can't handle this, because he had a very you know how sometimes when people move their lips, there's a dryness to the sound of the saliva. So you can tell. So for me, I can tell not only is the saliva wet, but their lips are dry from the particular sound. And for some reason, that makes me feel really uncomfortable, because it makes I don't know why. It's like I can feel the discomfort in the lips. I can feel the dryness in the lips. Um, so it I just find it interesting. It's like sometimes it's about the people and the places, I think.
hmm,
Like with my other half and my son, they've both had the dental work that's making how they sound different, and it's suddenly causing me issues that it didn't used to.
right, right. Yeah, how are they generally? I'm sure they have to be pretty sensitive to. I mean, they're aware of obviously what's, how you react in a lot of situations. Are they pretty accommodating?
They are.
Otherwise, they obviously they can't get their dental stuff changed now until that's all taken care of. But
No, the thing is I it's so hard for them, and it's so hard for them, and lockdown has made things so hard because they always used to escape, and I always used to stay. And in me staying, I get my peace and quiet, and then they get their escape and their sort of peace and quiet. Like, it's tricky because with the TV, I go, can you not fidget? And it even gets to the point where this is probably going to sound a lot very extreme to some people, especially those who I don't know, but so I find it difficult when people sit with their legs crossed, because I
mm,
find suddenly when people have their legs crossed, their feet are much more likely to fidget. Um, and so I go, can you not cross your legs, please? Can you try not to cross your legs? And I would say, like, TV time in the evenings, I sit further forward. Um,
right, so you can't see what's going on with the other people.
my son, the way he sits, he has his feet out, and I pick up on. I can, without seeing it, I can tell when my other half has crossed her legs from behind my back. I can tell. I don't know why. It's the sound. Um,
Yeah,
I immediately, as it happens, I turn around and go, "Do you mind not crossing your legs like that?" So for me, it's so intense that we watch a 1 hour. We can't watch. We plan for movies. We watch a 1 hour episode of something, and then I take a 5 or 10 minute break in another room, and I come back. I give them, in the 5 or 10 minutes, I give them a chance to kind of chat and chill a bit more.
yeah, yeah,
We come back and maybe watch another episode. But the somebody twirling their hair. My son, if he twirls his hair, I feel like a plane that's just done a spiraled out of control. It literally, the twirling sound is how I feel that moment, and I don't feel threatened. I don't feel angry. I do feel angry, but I feel angry because that motion is inside me. and I don't want it to be inside me. It's somebody else is doing it. It's not me. So why am I feeling like that motion is so internalized and so violating? And that's what's so hard to deal with.
Were these? I know you had sensitivities before that alarm clock, the blackout situation. But were you having this kind of level and severity before that, or before that trauma, or
Well,
curious if that was like a big change that added to all of these?
Well, you see, the difficulty is, right? Okay, so I worked doing software development, and I sometimes did long hours. But before I met my other half, I spent 98% of my free time was de-stressing and calming down. I would sat there on a sofa. I would be going to a cinema. Somebody gets a little light on their mobile phone for more than 3 or 4 seconds, and I'm there saying, "Excuse me, do you mind?" Yeah, I can't go to the cinema anymore. Things have changed. You know, people pull out their phones, and a lot of people are turning the lights on. I wouldn't be able to handle that. I'd have an argument. I'd have a meltdown. So what I'm saying is that in my 20s, before I met my other half, everything is about de-stressing. That's all my free time. Yeah. And then when I met my other half, you're suddenly sharing time with another person. And then the time when I got my ARVC scare, she actually was pregnant. So she'd just become pregnant at the same time as I suddenly had my death thing. And so your all of your sense, like another thing that's really difficult to understand for people is sleeping in the same bed as somebody else is not something I can handle. And I didn't realize that until a couple of months. So we have our beds separated by a little gap. Yeah. Because I can't go to sleep with somebody else touching me or feeling somebody else near to me. I can't relax like that. So in my 20s, I didn't share a life with somebody. So it's very different in your 30s. In my 30s, when I was, you get so much more stimulation from another person. And I say to my other half, I say, I couldn't do without you. I don't want to be here without you, but it's like, so you can't, if you have that human need where you need to have a relationship, but it's going to cause you some degree of overstimulation and some degree of not being able to just sit in a room on your own for a few hours on a Saturday, then, and she's really awesome actually, because she goes out and about, she understands, she's doing everything she could possibly do. And the thing where she ends up triggering me is where she gets a new piece of jewelry. It's like, I like the fact that she likes jewelry and she's interested in that. But if it's full of beads, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah. So you're able to kind of like identify the relatively few things that maybe cause a big problem with her, and are able to appreciate having her around, having your family around.
Oh, family is when you have it, once you have it, family is everything. It's everything. They're you were saying to me, do I have any really good friends? Yes, they're my partner and my son, and they're the most important people to me. And just because I'm having all of these difficulties doesn't mean that isn't a more primary need. It is a more primary need. The need for, in my case, for family. I need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick. So, yeah, there's so many, so many other places. Wow. I want to go, but I do want to kind of respect your time. Also, I do need to get back to my my day job a little bit, which is consulting for happens to be an e-commerce contract right now. So let me hit
Thank you, Adil.
Thank you, Nick. Sorry, everyone, about that abrupt ending there. We did go on and talk about a bunch of other tangents, which I didn't think were super relevant, but well, to this topic. But I mean, it's amazing to talk to Nick. If you liked this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website, misophoniapodcast.com. There's always Instagram, Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, and Twitter at Misophonia Show. Don't forget the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.